Hello everyone. My voice has finally went back to normal, so this is the first of my normal narrations. I wanted to say a big thank you to everybody for all the support and kind messages. Let me start by disclaiming that I'm not schizophrenic. I don't have any psychological issues of any sort. If you're not going to believe me, then don't listen. For the past 6 months, I've really liked using guided spoken meditations to fall asleep to. I always ended up returning back to the same one. It works wonders for me. I fall asleep with my mind at peace and my worries at bay. Then, last night, I decided to try a different meditation video that I've never seen before. The thumbnail, it caught my attention immediately. It was a picture of what seemed to be stars. But the stars come together to form a smiling face with a large circular hollow eye made out of more stars. The video was called Immersive Astrological Journey. So I clicked on the video, got nice and comfortable and closed my eyes. It started like any other meditation video that I've seen before. If you've ever done this before, basically a person does a voiceover and tells you to relax. Breathe deeply and clear your mind. After this, the visual part of the meditation begins. Now, last night, I was very exhausted, so I ended up nodding off before the visual proportion even begun. The last thing that I remembered before falling asleep was breathing in into the count of 4, holding, and exhaling for the count of 5. Sometime later, I woken up in sleep paralysis. The headphones were still on my ears. The meditation was still going, except there was no voiceover. There was no soothing descriptions for visualization. There was a loud, and I mean loud static sound, like the kind you hear on the radio. Then, there was this insistent whispering. It was so low and gravelly that it sounded like a growl. It said over and over, "He watches from above. He watches from above." I laid there paralyzed with an indescribable sense of dread washing over me. I wanted to move. I wanted to make my body wake up, and I wanted that thing to stop, but it just kept on going. The more the voice repeated, "He watches from above," the more terrified I became. I had this feeling that I knew somebody was watching me. This went on for what felt like hours, but in reality, it must have been about 20 minutes because the video was only 31 minutes long to begin with. When I was then finally able to break out of the paralysis, I tilted my head up. I saw it. A big black shape stretched over my bed. The neck was elongated to the point where its face hovered over a foot from my own. Oh man, its face. Its eyes were abnormally large and round and white with these massive pupils like a cat gets when it's about to hunt something. Its nose was like a goat's nose or something, just these 2 black deep slits. I can't think about its mouth without feeling sick. I could smell its breath. It smelled like rotting carcasses and mold. The mouth was wide. It seemed to be smiling. It had rows and rows of tiny sharp teeth. If lamprey eels could smile, it would look exactly like what I saw. I stared at it, paralyzed with fear for 5 hours until the sun finally come up. Once the sun had started to appear through my windows at around 6 AM, it slowly crawled backwards off my ceiling and seemed to ooze into the closet floor to disappear. At this point, I really don't know what to do. I don't know what I could have done to myself to cause this. All I know is that I would honestly rather collapse of sleep deprivation than ever willingly go to sleep again. I want to say up front for the record that I have zero belief in the paranormal, and I believe all of what I'm about to tell you is simply a figure of my imagination. That said, I realise that others will think differently, and appreciate the story more. It doesn't mean that this thing hasn't creeped me out. It did. It still does. Anyway, I work overnight at a funeral home. Basically, I babysit the place all by myself all night. If somebody passes away during the night, I'm there to answer the phone and dispatch somebody for the body. I clean up a little and get a few things ready for the funerals the next day. Not the most glamorous job, but I do it anyway. Even with my few duties, I end up with hours to kill every night. Now, I'm not technically supposed to sleep on the job. That said, I do sometimes. I'll nod off at the desk, or sometimes I'll go lay down on some of the couches and take a power nap. I'm alone all night, other than a few of the bodies in the different rooms. It's boring. I think most people would do the same. The weird thing is, I get sleep paralysis on a regular basis when I fall asleep at work. Although there's been very few times when somebody's shown up at the funeral home in the middle of the night unannounced, I was always fearful that one of the directors will show up unexpectedly and catch me asleep. I believe this fear causes me to sleep lightly and to have sleep paralysis because I've never had sleep paralysis while at home. For those of you who have never had sleep paralysis, basically, it's like this. Your eyes are open and you're seeing your surroundings, but you're not actually awake. Sometimes you actually see and hear things that aren't actually there. And you can't move. It feels as if you're being held down against your will. For myself, I can usually snap myself out of it and awake if I strain and thrash against it hard enough. And then I become fully awake suddenly and can move. Now, onto the weirdness that began to happen when I would slip into sleep paralysis during a nap. The first was the music. Sometimes, when I would find myself lying there with my eyes wide open in sleep paralysis, I would begin to hear music, loud and vividly. It was almost always Christian gospel music, but modern stuff like you'd hear on the radio. It was always coming from the inside of my head, in particular from my mouth area. This sounds stupid, but at one point, I began to even wonder if I was picking up some AM Christian stations with my feelings or what. I was thinking, maybe when I opened my mouth, this clashing together would pick up signals. I even went so far as to remember one of the lyrics from one of the songs that I heard. When I woke up, I googled it, although it didn't appear to be a real song. Then, the weirder stuff started happening. Sometimes when I'd fall asleep, I'd go into sleep paralysis and I would think that somebody was walking towards me in one of the hallways. I was always in fear that an employee had showed up unexpectedly. I would always frantically strain against the sleep paralysis and wake up, at which point the sound of the footsteps were always gone. Afterwards, I would always feel stupid for being awoken by imaginary sounds. This went on for months and months, the music and the footsteps. Anyways, when I'd hear the footsteps, I'd always be on the side of caution and force myself awake in case it was another employee, only to be awoken and find nobody was there, and I'd ruined a perfectly good nap. One night while I was particularly tired and napping on the couch, I slipped into this state again and heard footsteps. I decided screw it. I wasn't going to get tricked again by my sleep paralysis for the millionth time. I just laid there, expecting that I would either eventually wake up normally or I would go back to full sleep, or that they would just continue towards me and continue in the same way that the music always does. So I was laying on my back, completely stretched out, and a man came walking up from my direction. Coming into my field of view and stopping directly next to me, there was nothing in particular that was memorable about him, just a white guy in some kind of dress shirt and slacks. Except for one thing though, His face and head were obscured. They were blurred out, just like you see on the news when they're hiding somebody's identity. His head and face were there, just very blurry. Then, to my horror, he reached out and poked me lightly in the forehead and let out a kind of sinister chuckle. At this point, I of course snapped myself awake and found myself alone as always. It was very disturbing though, to say the least. Probably not as much for most though, to be honest, because I truly have no belief in ghosts or the paranormal. I actually chalked it up again to my brain playing tricks on me. But since then, it's happened more than twice. The second time I saw someone, I found myself with my eyes wide open, in sleep paralysis, staring at it. And there was a woman, holding a gun to her side, just staring at me passively. Thankfully, I knew immediately that it was just my sleep paralysis and didn't panic, but I was so unnerved enough to force myself awake and cause this woman to vanish. The third time was similar to the first. I was laying on the couch and this time a small child approached me from behind. I think it is a boy, but I couldn't say for sure, probably about 6 or 7. And his face was also blurred. He giggled once in amusement. I immediately scared myself to the point that I forced myself awake. Of all times it happened, this was the most disturbing by far. Now like I said, I'm sure this is all in my imagination, but I'm starting to get a bit creeped out by it. I hope these stop. I'm worried that it has something to do with the bodies around me.